Thank you, Dia. It goes without saying that the mere mention of Afghanistan today gets one to miss one's heartbeat. The war in Afghanistan has been really raging for more than 20 years, 3 times more than the duration of the World War II, and will amount to more than $2 trillion in damages. And we need to really find out today why Afghanistan is looking more precarious than ever. Departure of US forces in the middle of a resurgent Taliban taking over Kabul. And there is definitely growing speculation around the stability of Afghanistan today. Today, we are going to discuss a very, very important book on Afghanistan, Quest for a Stable Afghanistan, A View from Ground Zero. And today, we are very privileged to have among us the author, Mr. Sujit Sarkar. He's the former head of governance with Aga Khan Foundation and is currently the global CEO for an international aid agency working towards improving quality of life for marginalized and disadvantaged section of the society across Asia and Africa. And I'm Neeta Aneja, and I'm the founder of Trends, which is the platform for art, cultural, social, and literary experiences. And we have our Trends Literature series running this year. So welcome, Sujit, on our 57th author interaction under our Trends Literature series. And what an opportunity for us to discuss View from Ground Zero in Afghanistan.
Good evening, Neeta. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a privilege.
Thank you, Sujit. Sujit, to start with, I'm extremely keen to know that while writing the book, Quest for a Stable Afghanistan, though during the course of the book, you did foresee Taliban gaining grounds, but did you ever visualize the situation will take such a turn?
So this is my second book, Quest for a Stable Afghanistan. My first book was published in 2012. It was, I call it In Search of a New Afghanistan.
Yes.
So that book was very optimistic, very positive about Afghanistan. Because I was actively engaged, I could see the state coming up nicely, But since 2014, the state started troubling. And, by the time when I was writing this book, 2019, I could clearly see the writing on the wall. And that's why time and again in this book, I have repeated that eventually the Taliban is going to capture Kabul. Stop them. And exactly that's what happened, on 15th of August, when we were celebrating Independence Day. Afghan was run over by the capital, Kabul was run over by Taliban. So I'm not at all surprised in that sense. It was written on the wall.
So much so, very right. And you coming because you've been in Afghanistan and you've stayed there and your voice really counts. Manzoor Faizi, who's the editor-chief of Afghanistan Times, said that, and I totally agree with him when he says this, that you've spent more than a decade in Afghanistan and you're brutally honest about current state of affairs. So does your heart reach out to the people of Afghanistan today?
In one of my interviews, I said, my heart bleeds, particularly when I think about the women, because this is a misogynist, government. This is anti-woman government, and all the significant gains that, all the international NGO have made, over the last 2 decades, particularly around women empowerment, all those are going to be neutralized, all those are going to be nullified now. To put it in perspective, all the women engineering and medical colleges, which are running in full capacity, will be certainly empty now with the Taliban capturing power in Kabul. Hundreds and hundreds of beauty parlors you could see in Kabul, all those will be stopped overnight, and all those have stopped. All the pictures of women have been taken out. All those my female colleagues, working with me in Aga Khan Foundation and with other agencies, freely working, will be all of a sudden, again confined within the peripheries of their household. So those are the things that really hurt me. It's devastating to put it in right terms.
I think all of us are devastated right now. The more videos that you see or more news that you hear on TV and international news covering Afghanistan, you're so right. All of us have a bleeding heart right now. The country director, Mohammad Zia, also wrote in the review on your book that Sujit does provide an intimate and detailed account of how the haggard and faulty policies of the West have put Afghanistan on the brink of a deeper an increasingly worrisome crisis. I really want to show everyone the book. This is a wonderful book, yeah. I wanted to request you as well. And this is extremely readable. It tells you so much about such unknown facts about Pakistan. And one should read it to find out what is happening there and what happened there and how we'll be discussing the book in the course of the interview conversation. This has been published by Rupa Publications. Yeah, thank you. I'm really, from your words, I'm really interested to know what really went wrong in Afghanistan. Was Trump's dialogue with Taliban leaders in November 2020, beginning of sealing of faith for Afghanistan's 48 million people? And then again, April 2021, there was a recommittal by Joe Biden to withdraw forces. Further closed, do you think, all hopes possibly for Afghanistan?
So to give you a broader perspective, why the US or the world, if I can say, lost the war in Afghanistan, in 5-6 points, it will be simply, first and foremost is that, the US and the NATO forces were always fighting the half enemy in Afghanistan. Why I'm saying half enemy? Because the Taliban were killed by the NATO and US forces, Afghan forces on the Afghan side of the border, while the same Taliban were allowed to move freely on the Pakistan side of the border, get mentoring, coaching, arms, ammunition, and all those things. Time and again, a lot of one British general, lost his job because of saying this, exposing this to his girlfriend, in a mail, that, if we fight for another 50 years also, we're not going to win this war because this is not the right strategy. How can you win a war when you, kill the Taliban on one side of the border and allow the same Taliban to move freely on the other side of the border? So that is the core reason. The second thing is that, in 2012, when my book was released, I was appearing in an interview in NDTV, and the journalist asked me, what is going to define the future of Afghanistan? I said, if the US can contain Pakistan's ability to influence unrest through Taliban in Afghanistan, half of the battle is won. The ability of Pakistan in aiding and abating terrorism within Afghanistan is very well documented in White House. Time and again, the senior officials of White House have, exposed Pakistan deceit and duplicity game in Afghanistan. But for the reasons better known to the White House, better known to all these four leaders who sucked into this Afghan war, they didn't deal Pakistan with an iron rod. If they would have dealt Pakistan very strictly, the result would have been very different. And I'll quote one, national security advisor of former national security advisor of Afghanistan, Rahmatullah Nabil. He was, during the Ashraf Ghani second, he was the national security advisor of NDS, which is equivalent to RAW in India. And he said a very nice thing. He said, look, I am giving you the GPRS coordinate of 30 Taliban leaders who are based in Pakistan. Fine. And so you send your drone and kill these 30 leaders and put Pakistan on the sanction for, 3 years. 99% of the Afghan problem is solved for the next 3 decades. So that never happened. So that was the second thing. Third thing is that, in Afghanistan, any layman will say, it's the poppy. It poisons Afghanistan. It's the axis of all evil, According to a UN report, the Taliban reportedly makes close to $250 million, through the lucrative poppy trade. Where does the money go? The money goes in recruiting, fresh fighters for jihad. The money goes in procuring lethal arms, ammunition, designing war strategies, and all those things. If the poppy would have been, rooted out of, or weeded out of Afghanistan, this Afghan war would have been, won long back. We wouldn't have to prolong it this further. And President Ghani once said, that without poppy, this war would have, won long back. That was his statement, Unfortunately, the US, despite employing $44 billion to eliminate, eradicate poppy completely from the soils and minds of Afghan farmers, failed to do so. On the contrary, despite employing $44 billion in poppy eradication, the poppy multiplied by 30-fold in Afghanistan. That means the money that Taliban were making in 2001, right now they are getting 30 times more money. And the result is for everyone to see how, they have turned themselves into a mean and lethal force, much more dangerous version of Taliban than what we have seen in 2001. Both thing was, this is a country, this is a context, where people are organized more in terms of their ethnicity, in terms of their, regional geography, in terms of, even the local commander leader. For them, nation comes to second because they have grown, they've never seen state playing a role. So for them, nations come second. So this was a wonderful opportunity for the state, to deliver, plethora of public services and connect all the Afghan citizens into the fold and fabric of the nation, which unfortunately the state also lost, For the last 20 years, they are concurrently placed, in the most 15 corrupt country of the world, if you go by the Corruption Perception Index and released by Transparency International every year. Now, if you see the GDP in 2009, it clocked as high as 19.3%. In 2020, what is the GDP? It is just, minus 1.9. See the downward slide. Like in terms of employment, they have failed, every year 70,000 graduates are coming out of, various colleges, universities in Afghanistan. The government forget about giving new jobs, even they are not able to protect the jobs of the graduates who are working in the system. The public state expenditure of the state, 90% it is dependent on foreign aid. Now, if you take any indicator of state building, all the indicators were drastically failing. So the state also, failed to, perform its duty, and lost a wonderful opportunity. So together, all those things, as I said, the writing was on the wall. And the last, the last nail in the coffin was the peace process. In a way, it inadvertently, handed the advantage to Taliban. Like I have never seen a process, whereby the US and Taliban are killing each other until Friday in Kabul, and on Saturday, they are huddling with each other, singing peace carol in Doha. So they legitimized the Taliban through the peace process. They gave them traction to the international media through the peace process. So that was also very ill negotiated. Together, all those things, led to the collapse of Afghanistan.
So very right. And it is really very well mentioned in your book. In fact, the recent haul of the drug in the Gujarat from Afghanistan is another example how poppy has been so important. In fact, in your chapter, the first chapter, which is Poppy, the Axis of All Evils, you've rightly addressed this issue. And also about this peace process that you're talking about, your second chapter, On Again, Off Again, peace process. I suppose you've wonderfully described the background of how Poppy has been important and how and why the peace negotiations went on and they failed miserably. So why do you think, I've been reading the book and I've been also reading and watching so many other videos, but I really want to know, why do you think personally that your book is absolutely a must read, perhaps for the US political leadership?
See, it analyzes, the factors, the causes, underlying causes, that, a landed advantage or handed advantage to the Taliban. It also takes a very critical dig on the policies of the West, that led to the collapse of Kabul. Overall, it's a book for anyone, any layman, who want to understand what and how it all went wrong in Afghanistan. In a way, this is the whole balance sheet of 20 years of the Afghan war. If you see the other books available, these are bits and pieces, something on poppy, something on peace process. But if anyone would like to have a comprehensive view, just going through one book, I think this is the only book available in the market.
Very right. I totally agree with you. Tell us, why did 20 years of unparalleled military support and financial aid fail to pacify one of the world's most volatile nations? And what was the West's biggest failure in Afghanistan?
As I told you, nothing worked, in Afghanistan.
Yes.
There was a big failure on the state building front, whereby, we employed billions of dollars to build a state. It was never a running state. It was never a very stable, strong state. We invested $44 billion in eradicating poppy, eliminating poppy, which remains a principal source of finance, finance with lifeline rather for Taliban. If you cut the poppy, they are gone. They are completely out of Afghanistan. Fine. Even after employing $44 billion, we couldn't do it. Peace process, which we started negotiating from 2010 onwards, on and on and on and on. By 2020, we didn't arrive anything. America was looking a perfect cover under the guise of, peace process to exit from Afghanistan. They also knew, the writing was on the wall. I've written in the book that we are going to, be defeated in Afghanistan. So, under the garb of the peace process, under the peace cover of the peace process, let exit from Afghanistan. So the peace process never worked. Then building this whole military, Afghan military, as a robust Afghan military as a part of state building, also never worked. Now somebody should question them. If you see, like they started seriously into the business, they started the business of training Afghan military very seriously post 2011 onwards, when the peace process started gaining traction, while the state building agenda was, articulated way back in 2001 November, when the Taliban was driven out of Afghanistan. Now, somebody should ask them, why have they lost these 10 years, to arrive at a conclusion that no, we have to build a robust Afghan army, because that is what is going to, protect the nation, protect the government and things like that. So, any peace you pick up, it has never worked in Afghanistan, and the reasons are galore, One is the local context. Second is the constant, aiding and abetting of terrorism by Pakistan. Third is the faulty policies. Fourth is the, fragile government. All this together led.
But why such confusing statements from Pakistan? First, they get to support Taliban. And then recently, Mr. Khan has been also talking about, okay, it's a failure of humanitarian grounds, and there should be inclusive government, for which he's been really opposed in Talibanized Afghanistan. So why do you think they don't have any option left, or why are such conflicting reports coming from their statements?
Yeah, when I was staying in Afghanistan, I've traveled extensively, from the stable provinces to the volatile southern provinces, to the eastern provinces. I have interacted with the last person in the village to the highest echelons of, policy making in Kabul. I've interacted the entire length and breadth of the country. And I always say this, that, at least 80 to 90% of the Afghans are against Pakistan. Primarily because they know that, all these, Talibans are being sent, and even at times, suicide bombers from, other, Pakistan terror groups are sent to Afghanistan, to create a problem. They are doing this, they are creating the same sort of problem that we see in Kashmir, spreading unrest, aiding and abetting terrorism, through direct, indirect means, in Afghanistan. No, somebody from the state, obviously Afghanistan cannot control Pakistan. They don't have that financial muscle or the military muscle to control or contain Pakistan. There was the role of, White House, to go very strictly after Pakistan. Perhaps I would go as harsh as, sanctioning them for, 2-3 years, something like that, to make them toe the line in Afghanistan. And if that was done, we would have achieved everything in Afghanistan. The result would have been completely different. But as I say, even this is something, nobody has understood. The last 3-4, former national intelligence chief, I have interacted with 2 or 3 top leaders, top ministers, have interacted with all them. Nobody understands why, US has not dealt Pakistan strictly. Maximum they use is a carrot and stick policy, to control the funds, that if you perform, then we will give you funds, something like that. And everybody, including the top official, including former President Trump, has said that they continue to play the deceit and duplicity game in Afghanistan.
Yes. Is it also to do with the fact that they don't have any choice? I mean, they share a border with Afghanistan, and they need to have this, double policy, because if they do not support Taliban, they will have a terrorism problem in their state. Or otherwise, if they do support, they're going to have a lot of refugees coming in. So I'm sure it is also to do with the fact that it has got a border with them, and knowing Pakistan, it does play its own double games. But coming to India, what do you think are the challenges for India in crafting its future diplomatic initiatives to maintain peace and stability in its neighborhood?
Let me answer this.
What role can we play? Yes, please. What role are we going to play?
Let me answer in 2 pieces. First, let me explain why Pakistan, Afghanistan is very important. Because through Afghanistan, they can really damage and bleed India, which is the policy manual of ISI, bleed India to death, the policy and manual of ISI. Now, how? You see, what they will do right now is that, they have fixed up all the pro-ISI radical, Taliban leader in the power corridor of Kabul. Now, the Taliban was fighting with each other, who will be the prime minister, who is going to be the, finance minister and all those things. General Faiz Hamid, the ISI chief, arrive, on a charter flight, and within half an hour, everything is solved, and they decide who is going to head the government. So all this, hardliner pro-ISI people are now, capturing the power corridor of Kabul. Obviously, they will use this, to train jihadists, with the anti-India sentiment, with the anti-India objective and things like that. So that is going to be the core focus. If you see, the reports that is available in public domain for the last 2 years, any terrorist, and I'm talking about Pakistani terrorists, caught up, in Kashmir, including the two nephews of, the Jaise founder of Jaise Mohammed, Maulana Masood Azhar, they have been trained in Afghanistan. Now you see, this was happening, when we had a pro-India government sitting in Kabul. Imagine when there is a pro-ISI government, all those hardliners sitting in Taliban, how the soil of Afghanistan is going to use against India. That's one thing. Second thing is that, all of us know that 75% of the heroin, of world's heroin is produced in Afghanistan. And you must have heard about the cash that the India custom official have caught in Mundra port. Now they will also try to, push all these drugs, into India, to spoil the youth generation, That is, another game they are going to play. Third thing is that, in 2001, Pakistan had a solid grip on Taliban. But in 2020-21, now Pakistan as well as China both have a, very strong grip on Taliban. So, India must be braced up not only for more attack in Kashmir, but also, deal with other pressure points beyond Kashmir in India. And the last point is that, all this Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaise Mohammed, all this, anti-India terrorists, or if I can say Kashmir-focused terrorists, now they have got a dangerous template out of Afghanistan. That, if you fight with this, no matter how big the power is, and there is no bigger power than US military, if you fight with the biggest power, and protractedly you will fight, continuously with them, eventually you are going to win it. And that's what has been proven in Kabul. So the template they would like to extend now in Kashmir. So, we all must brace up, for more attacks, for dealing with more pressure point beyond Kashmir in India. That's why, for Pakistan, Afghanistan is very, very important, because they know through Afghanistan, they can continue to bleed India. That's one part of the answer. The second part of the answer, what, India should do. If you ask me, and I've said it in one interview that, for once, India should think, beyond the rhetorics of foreign policy, beyond the standard molds of foreign policy. They should, open one development aid office in Afghanistan, to continue the excellent development work, excellent civilian goodwill work that all the previous two governments, including the BJP government, has continued to do in Afghanistan. And that's why we have earned tremendous civilian goodwill in Afghanistan. Today, I can blindly say, as a part of my interaction with the wider cross-section of Afghan community, that India remains their most popular friend. It is widely popular among Afghanistan. And I also have to give, the courtesy to the Bollywood movie industry. They also have done a tremendous favor, in promoting that culture, bonhomie friendship between Afghanistan and India. So they should continue to open a development office in Afghanistan. And further, they should start a new division within the Doha embassy, in the name of Afghan division, something like that. Because right now, after Kabul, the bulk of the hectic lobbying, networking, all those things around Afghanistan is going to happen in Doha. So if we have a diplomatic post over there, we can align with, all Western powers, US, UK, France, what they're thinking, how they're thinking, calibrate our approach, and make a more realistic response, towards Afghanistan. So I think these two things, is needed. Unfortunately, in no policy manual of, foreign policy will say, somebody will say, open a development office. But that is the irony, like you have to, deal with situation. I think for Afghan situation, this is the best template for the next 2 years. And perhaps after that, we can review the situation and take a more informed and objective call.
No, I totally agree with you. You've been the developmental expert also, and you work with the Aga Khan Foundation. But tell me one thing right now, even US aid is frozen, and other international funding agencies have also stopped because they feel that if they push in the money, maybe the Taliban is going to use it. But 14 million, near to 14 million people there are facing hunger and lack of basic necessities. So how do you think this problem is going to get solved? Because nobody is interested in giving them aid right now because they know maybe it might be used for terrorist activities. Maybe it might be used for Talibanized Afghanistan and might not go to the right sources. So how do you think, being an expert yourself, how do you think this problem ultimately is going to get solved? Because it's all kind of frozen right now.
We must, make a distinction of the aid that we're talking about. Now, there are two types of aid. One aid is, here's a bilateral aid. You're giving it to Taliban, and I'm strictly against it. Strictly against it because in a way you're legitimizing the whole thing. The
Right.
whole party. No, if the people is your ultimate objective, people shouldn't suffer. Those who are, living in the remote, districts, remote villages, entire length and breadth of Afghanistan, they shouldn't suffer. And for them, development agencies, international NGOs, must, work keeping those in target. And, all the countries, instead of passing the money to Taliban, at least can pass, the humanitarian aid to the international NGO so that the good, excellent development work that has been initiated will continue. And that's why, UN, if you have heard followed the news, UN has made a call, humanitarian aid, call, and whereby it is heard that, they have mobilized close to about $1 billion, in terms of humanitarian aid, so that, the last people are being supported in Afghanistan. Humanitarian aid is being provided to them in this hour of exigency.
Fantastic. I mean, coming back to one of my last questions before I move on to the interactive round is coming back to your book. I'm a little confused on the timeline. So when did you exactly write this book? And I know your first book came as early as 2012. So when was this book written? Because it had so many facts leading to the...
I started writing, from April 2019. I seriously started writing this book. And I continued in March. I submitted the manuscript, But there was so much. The context was so volatile and so fast changing. I had to again go back to the script, adjust a few things like that. So that's why at times, you may feel like, what is the timeline? But that is the reason. It was started from like April 2019, and the manuscript was submitted, in March. And later on, we made some changes depending upon the situation.
Fantastic. It's immensely a readable book, and there is so much of content that in order to understand what Afghanistan is going through, I think we should read your book and find out so many reasons and so much of background. I'll come back to my questions perhaps later if the time permits, but I'll go on to the interactive round. And first of all, I'd like to invite Dia Aneja. She's a student of class 11th, and she's been feeling very strongly about the Afghanistan issue. Dia.
So interesting to listen to you, especially because you know so much about this topic, which is very interesting. So I just wanted to ask, as you've indicated very strongly in your book, Taliban captured Kabul. With your experience of staying in Afghanistan, how do you feel Taliban 2.0 is different from Taliban 1.0? And my second question was, do you think US should have negotiated with Taliban in the first place?
The first question, how I feel Taliban 2.0 is different from Taliban 1. If you see the leadership pattern, lot of, a sea change has, happened in terms of leadership. Those, the hardliners, bulk of them are gone. Mullah Mansoor Akhtar, then, Baitullah Masood, Mullah Omar, all those bulk of the leader has gone. And a lot of moderate face, has also, infiltrated Taliban, or has captured some space in Taliban, So there is a fierce tug of war, going within the Taliban right now, between the moderate phase who want to reform, want to change, and the radical, who has the only uniform agenda of, putting the Shariat law, in Afghanistan, and that to their interpretation of Shariat law. So that tug of war is happening. As of now, it's amply clear that, the radical are, enjoying the political space. They are riding the power, because if you see some of the leaders, 16, UN terrorists, UN sanctioned terrorists are in the part of the government. Let me introduce 2 or 3 ministers, the Prime Minister, Muhammad Hassan Akhund, despite, in addition to being a UN sanctioned terrorist, he was the culprit, who ordered the destruction of the giant Buddha, which would have been, the 8th wonder of the world so easily in Bamiyan. So he was the one. Like if you go to the finance minister, Muhammad Hidayatullah, Mullah Muhammad Hidayatullah, he is one of the kingpin of the drug racket, So he is the finance minister. If you go to the finance minister, to the information minister, Mullah Khairullah was a Guantanamo Bay detainee. He was jailed in Guantanamo Bay. He was, released by US authorities in exchange of US soldiers captured in Afghanistan by Taliban. So right now, it's difficult for me or for anyone to predict, whether they're going to change or not. But if you see the footprint of the current government, anybody will say that, right now the power is highly in favor of the strong, of the radical faction. That is the first part of the question. Can you repeat the second part, please?
Yes. Do you think that the US should have negotiated with Taliban in the first place?
See, US, wasted the whole opportunity in Afghanistan. If they were serious about peace process, they should have negotiated way back in November 2001 when Taliban was driven out of Afghanistan. If anything you would have given to Taliban, they would have accepted it because they knew we are not coming back. They lost an opportunity. Again, second opportunity was, before in 2009, when everything was going hunky-dory in Afghanistan, development was happening, a lot of things were moving in the positive direction. Then they could have, Taliban was at its lowest, in terms of influence and power. They could have negotiated then and instilled a much, much better version of peace deal then. They failed again. When they captured and killed Osama bin Laden, that was the best point, for US to pressurize, because Mullah Omar was also died at that point of time. The news came out. So that was the best point, where they could have, forced the Taliban to sign a peace deal. They didn't, discuss peace when there was at this critical juncture. They started negotiating peace with Taliban when there was at their strongest ever in the history of Afghanistan, And Taliban was absolutely clear that we'll continue this discussion. At the same time, we'll carry on our routine business because, whether US sign this peace deal or not, we are going to win the war. So US was in a very, very, backward position, awkward position, and in a very weak position, to get anything out of, Taliban under the peace deal.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dia. Next, we have Jay. He's a classical singer. At the same time, he's a UPSC. He's preparing for his UPSC and he's a big fan of history books and anything which gives him a lot of intake. Yes, Jay. Welcome.
Namaskar and good evening, sir. It's good to see you and interact with you. So my question would be generally related to the future, although it's difficult to predict. But as we all know that these are this band of desperados masquerading as the saviors of Afghanistan, the Taliban. So we have seen the reports about the civil disputes among themselves. As I could see the news, there are disputes related to Ghani Baradar. So my question would be, what exactly is the future of those ethnic group of Hazaras, as they belonging to the Shia sect, and they are the ones prosecuted at large by the dominant Talibani Sunni. So what's their future?
See, one thing is that, those who are talking about, or suggesting Taliban to make an inclusive government, make a gender responsive government, doesn't know the DNA of Taliban. I'm sorry to say that. Because, they are misogynist, they are anti-minority, they are anti-women, and things like that. And governance and development is never in the DNA of Taliban. Never it was and never it will be in future. So, there are three possibilities, happening from here on. One is that, they, which is is more potent, is that, they infighting within the Taliban faction, increases a lot and they collapse on their own. So that is, one strong theory. The second possibility is that, they really reform themselves, and, deliver development, they gain broader international recognition and things like that. So whereby they at least, serve as a semi-state, if not a top class government, which is very remote again, I'm saying. Third possibility is also that, if they are able to control Afghanistan very strongly, then perhaps there will be a marriage between the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and, the Afghanistan version of Pakistan. And they may start, making a grandiose state, idea like India, part of Kashmir, Pakistan, and, Afghanistan putting all under Shariat law. So this is also one possibility, possibility. So these are three distinct possibilities. As far as what's going to happen to Hazara, like, if that's everybody's concern, everybody's concern, because they are anti-Hazara, they will go outrightly, and start killing Hazara. Again, for Hazara, even the ISIS, which has a very strong presence now in Afghanistan, so they are also anti-Hazara. So I really, worry about them, what is going to happen. Unfortunately, as of now, I don't have an answer, ready-made answer to tell you what is going to be the future of Hazara, but it is definitely very, very precarious if you see their past record.
Yes, sir. It's actually very disheartening to see them evacuating the country and like falling off the planes. We could see the videos.
Couldn't agree.
Very tragic.
Yeah, sir, one more question. I have a quick question.
Sure.
So, as the onset of Taliban government, how it is going to shape the geopolitics of the Indian subcontinent, not only India, but the whole subcontinent?
Like a lot of terrorism is going to increase, that's for sure. Terrorist activity is going to see upswing. Like, again, like, you have to see like whether Pakistan can contain Taliban. As of now, they are containing Taliban very nicely. They have fixed all the, pro-ISI, radical Taliban leader, the powerful leader of Kabul. That's going fine. But how long they are able to retain that influence is going to define the course and character of, Taliban and terrorism in this region. And obviously, like, everybody knows it goes without saying that Pakistan, ISI particularly is going to use them, as a strategic asset, to continue to spread unrest in India.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I forgot to announce that I'll be giving 3 giveaways of this wonderful book, depending on the questions, and I'll declare the winners on the social media tomorrow. So I have one question from Deepak. He's joined in from London. He's unable to ask directly because he has some problem with his people. He says, what lessons can India learn from Afghanistan?
It's a very good question, very intelligent question. There are 2 parts of India's engagement in Afghanistan, fine? So one was a civilian, engagement, whereby we continued all the development aid, all the humanitarian aid and all those things. And the second part was the strategic engagement. In fact, in my book, there's a nice chapter called as Indo-Pak Proxy Battle.
Yes, that is the last chapter.
Exactly, last chapter. So, there was a BBC poll, which was done among Afghans. And I think more than 80% people, voted for India when it comes to civilian goodwill. So they are number 1. I'm not even saying in comparison to Pakistan. Among any donor countries, India remains number 1 popular choice among Afghan as far as the development part, civilian goodwill part is concerned. So that part, India has played the cards very, very well. Right? The second part, the strategic engagement part, that is somewhere, I'm not convinced India play their card brilliantly, for varied reasons. If I can pinpoint 2, 3, 4 reasons. First and foremost is that, when, the world was making amends to their long-standing position on Taliban in 2010, that yes, there can be good Taliban and bad Taliban. India, stick to their rigid stance. No, cannot be good Taliban and bad Taliban. All Taliban are bad Taliban. That isolated them completely from the Afghan peace game and any, high table concerning to the future of Afghanistan. So that was a strategic, strategic blunder. Now, if you see in 2018-19, the same India government started sending representatives, to talk with Taliban in Russia, and although in unofficial capacity in Russia and other high tables. No, by then, India has lost that strategic relevance, by then, because it was too late, if not too little. So that is, one part of it. Second thing is that, India, put all their eggs or put all their stakes on a government that is highly corrupt. The Ghani government I'm talking about, highly corrupt. That was, completely, lost traction from the citizens. It was inefficient to the core. And on the top of it, it was constantly losing its legitimacy, dwindling legitimacy it was dealing with. Every election was become more disputed than the previous one. So the legitimacy was also falling. So India, invested all its stake, on Ghani government, which they shouldn't have done. And the third point is that, India was too much dependent on US, to protect its stake in Afghanistan. And I'll not complain against the US. They also lead India nicely to the garden path, But then all of a sudden, the US were in such a precarious position, in such a weak position, that they couldn't do anything. As a result of which, India lost the whole plot in Afghanistan. India would have, played the strategic game, looking into their core interests rather than depending too much on US or, putting all their stakes in Ashraf Ghani. I think that is the lesson, for India to learn in future.
Absolutely right. I'll come to Alka Khanna. She's a social worker and she is with an international NGO, Able Charities. Dear, can you switch on the video, please? Hello, Alka.
Good evening, Surjit ji. Very congratulations for your hard work on this wonderful topic that is, I think, a matter of concern to the whole world today. Do you believe that now that with the Taliban issue, having a gun means you have the right to do everything? And second part of my question is, do you believe that America purposely exited Afghanistan to break China and just they are powerful enough to make a difference even today? If they come back, they can wipe out Taliban in one day, I think. But do you think that was a strategy to break China, or what is your opinion on this?
See, I'm not naming the person, withholding the name, but a very, very senior, minister from Afghan government, called me the day Taliban captured Kabul, and I was speaking to him, and then he was complaining a lot that, US, left this, country at a wrong time, US would have, continued, that would have, defeated the Taliban and blah, blah. I told him, one thing, which I'm again repeating here, I said, look, in a country where your elected president runs away, where your army of 300,000 personnel refused to fight with the Taliban, where you have 124 fighter jet and, attack helicopter Taliban had done, and that was the biggest military asymmetry. And all the, all the pilots, took off the flight to bomb the Taliban and eventually landed, in Uzbekistan and asking for political signs. Do you expect any third country, to come and rescue you, when your own people are not ready to fight, not ready to protect the country? And tell me one thing, sir, like suppose US would have vacated Afghanistan in 2027. Was the outcome going to be any different? Be honest to yourself. He said, no, Sujit, you are saying right, even in 2027, the result would have been same, the outcome would have been same, Taliban would have, captured Kabul. I see if the result is same in 2027 or 2029, then how does it matter, when US leaves? US lost the war, we can criticize as much as we want US on the strategic part, on the tactical part, on the policy part, which have done severely in the book. But, I cannot, blame them on the timing part, because that was written on the wall. If not, it should have happened 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It was bound to happen.
Even I think Trump had made it very clear. But I just want to know, is it a purposely thought of exit from Taliban, according to you?
No. They were tired. They knew that they're not going to win in this war in the next 100 years also. The best cover they were looking was the peace process. Unfortunately, that never, worked out in their favor. And that's why they had to move, because, there was no solution on site. And that was the reason why they left, Otherwise, you see, they invested $2 trillion. They, 2,554 American Marines' life was lost.
So this is difficult to digest. Why would a country like America invest so much money and resources and time in a country which they saw no future? And even now, I don't think they're going to let their pennies just fall to waste. I'm sure they're going to make something out of it.
And that's why I said, in 2001, perhaps when they have, forced all the Taliban to flee in Pakistan, that was the best time for them to, to leave or work out a peace deal. Even, when Mullah Masood and all those Taliban leaders were killed, they didn't do that, Rather, they transformed this whole military objective for which they had got a, sanction from the UN into a grandiose state building, poppy eradication, all those grandiose objectives.
I don't know. Can you answer one question of mine? What surprises me is, what is it that the Afghans or the Talibans want, which America couldn't do for them? And why are they so, unconquerable, should I say?
The answer is very simple. They are terrorists. So they want Shariat law. Fine. No, I have seen, I've traveled into, there is very, very, minuscule support from the people about the whole Taliban movement. but they can't do anything. They don't have, they can't fight with the Taliban. So like, there are a few villages in 2016, they were captured by Taliban. And I have, I was working with the local government there. So once I called all the local government people, to Kabul to have an interaction. I said, look, man, like you did so many things, we did so many things together. Now the Taliban has captured your village. So what is the plan B, or what are you doing right now? He said, look, we are sending our girls to the school, which we have agreed. We are doing everything, but we cannot fight the Taliban. They are with arms, ammunition. If we fight, they'll kill us. So, let them continue their path. Their, enemies against the government will continue our path.
So is Shariat only in Afghanistan and not in the other Islamic countries? There are almost 50 plus countries who are Islamics.
So that is the problem. Their interpretation of Shariat law is very different, than the civilized, Muslim countries. So that is the problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alka.
One thing is that if they are talking about the Shariat law, but if you go and ask the people, are they asking for those laws? They will say no. But with the force of a gun, with the guerrilla battles and all those things, they'll continue to fight. And I'm time and again, I'm saying, because I've seen it all, Pakistan have been overtly supporting them. Without Pakistan support, Taliban wouldn't have traveled to the distance they have traveled in Afghanistan.
It's very sad. 21st century, and look where we are heading.
True. Very.
So right, Alka, and our really heart goes out to all the women who've been now denied education,
Children,
the right
women,
to work, and the right to work.
Sad. Thank you, sir. Thank you, and great job done in your book. Thank you.
Now we have Arushi. She's going to ask you a question directly. Arushi. Yeah, can you unmute her, please?
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes.
Thank you so much. This talk was actually very interesting. I had no idea about the poppy situation there and how it has helped the Taliban. I wanted to know how you've seen the physicality of the country transform in terms of its ecology. As an ecologist and a sustainability researcher, I've always wondered how this angle has been impacting Afghanistan, and it will continue to do so. I was just watching a documentary the other day, and there was this person, a citizen of Afghanistan, who told the interviewer that, there's a point where there were all trees around them and now there are none. So it's a very interesting thing and a very important one at that to see, and I'd love to know your views about it.
No, I am seeing Kabul, from 2005 onwards. When I was posted in Kabul, I was stationed in Kabul for 5 years, and then I've been traveling every quarter, to Kabul. Kabul, as such, has not done much of changes other than all the skyscraper and lot of buildings and everything, coming up. Though the people says, if you compare with 1960 Kabul, the green cover is almost, reduced by 90%. That's what people say. I have not seen it. But if you ask me to compare in my tenure, I have not seen much in terms of changes in terms of green cover. But yes, a lot of buildings and all those things have come up, flats and all those things come up. That old, oriental charm of a country is somewhere lost, But if you go to the province, and I have seen almost 15 to 16 provinces out of 35, there, I have not seen much of the ecology going change, Obviously, agriculture pattern has changed, cultivation pattern has changed, cropping pattern has changed, all those things you'll see, but not much of so as an ecological change.
Thank you so much, Arushi. And with this, we come to the last of our questions. And thank you so much, Sujit, for an enriching and a very holistic session. It is definitely a political vacuum in Afghanistan since the pullback of US troops. And you having spent more than a decade in Afghanistan, your book indeed has a view from ground zero. And I'm really looking forward to many more such politically relevant books from your side. And thank you really for gracing our platform and enriching us with your talk.
Thank you. I'm honored.
And I would also like to thank Gitu and Rupa Publications, without whom this particular session would not have been possible. And my heartfelt thanks to all the interactive participants and all the audience who participated today. And thank you so much for a wonderful session.
All the audience, I really enjoy this kind of format, whereby I don't have to lecture much, rather, in a Q&A format. That suits more my style. It's lovely interacting with you all. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.